Big question. Thanks, Mel. Thanks, Sarah. Thank you for having me here. Yeah, it feels really good to be here. Yeah, a little bit about my journey and to keep this in a nutshell. Yeah, it kicked off, I think, early days with having an Eastern European father that had brilliant ideas of some useful conditioning and parts of it not so useful, but he would place me in front of a TV for hours and hours watching Bruce Lee and any film really that held a never say die attitude. Cool Runnings, Karate Kid, Mighty Ducks, all of them. and and so I grew up on a lot of that. So much so, like, he put me into little athletics, and I had finished the race, but I didn't know that the bell meant it was the last lap. And he's coming up next to me, and he's like, "You're finished. You're done." And I'm like, "No, I'm not." He's like, "No, you're finished. You can stop." I'm like, "No, I'm not." And so I kept on running, and then found out later, and all the kids were laughing at me that I'd done that extra lap. So that was real evidence that his early conditioning of never say die had worked, and had played a really useful role for me, but it also primed my mind in a beautiful way for a lot of this work and mindset work. It started off as mindset work, picking up my first book. It was handed to me by my neighbor when I was 16, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. And that completely sort of enthralled me that humans are walking around with different perspectives, looking at the exact same thing. And I remember the exact page that was in that book that kind of communicated that. And so, yeah, went off and did exercise and sports science. I was a pretty active kid, and I was like, what do I do with my life? I'd love to work with sports, and kept saying that I was going to work at the highest level of football as a player or otherwise, and ended up studying physiotherapy, doing work experience, and ended up at Sydney FC. And I was working as a physiotherapist there, I was in business partnership, and then that had come to a completion, new business partnership with physio clinics, and 2.5 years into that, I was like, oh, am I passionate about this? Like doing physio, I was working the work-life balance that I wanted. It was 4 days of work in the clinic, then working on the clinic and so on. 3-day weekends was all I wanted back then. It was a hard no I'm not passionate about this per se, but so I had to go on to a bit of a journey to explore, okay, well, what is it that I love about physio, but I can do outside of physio as well? And it was really just working with humans and getting on the same page with them as to how they're wanting, what would it look like to live in alignment with yourself, and supporting them in that. And in the physio context, it was to be able to move so that they felt better, so that they could be pain free, they would be better humans to be around, and so on and so on. But I realized that attend to the body, I can also attend to the mind. And then I went off on a journey of meditation. Um, meditation that came off the back of a very intense 3-month encounter with a French woman that had all of a sudden stopped. And my best mate was like, why don't you do this thing called meditation? And I was like, what? Just sit there with my hands like this and cross-legged and sit there for hours. And he was like, just go and do the course or whatever. And so I did a beginner's, intermediate. Master Brahm sort of said to me after one of the classes, he's like, Dan, because I'd asked so many questions, you're going to become a teacher. And I was like 24 years old, physiotherapist, driving back 9:30 p.m. at night. And I'm thinking, what the fuck is Master Brahm talking about? Back then, to teach meditation, like, what does it mean to teach meditation? And 6 months later, I ran my first, 10-week meditation and mindset course, and then, a retreat a year after that. And it all kind of continued there with my own coaching, deep spiritual inquiry work for many years, spending time in the jungle with ayahuasca and the Shipibo tribe there, which is super close to my heart, and a few Vipassanas, 10-day silent meditation retreats in Japan, in Australia, and yeah, coaching for the last 10 to 15 years with leaders within businesses, leaders of businesses, and entrepreneurs and founders. So yeah, that's how I've kind of landed here. I mean, it was a big question. There were a few layers to it. Yeah, so a lot of the work was very much, it wasn't without the body, but it was healthy. It was about healthy mind structures. It was about expanding the identity beyond the roles of what we do to include the roles, and to really connect with the absolute version of what we are and as divinity, and one, and being one with it all, but also embracing the very humanness of being a human and this life as a human being. And with that, kind of bringing those two planes together, being a beautiful unity, if we want to think of a version of unity. And so there was mind somatic mapping, which is incredibly powerful, but nothing that went fully beyond words, outside of what I'd experienced with psychedelics and plant medicines and the responsible use of those. Yeah, I remember turning to my back then partner, Sarah, and saying, listen, we need to do this breathwork thing, because breathwork was something that we would include as this rounding out of a retreat, and would bring in facilitators for that. And it was Wim Hof to start off with, and then they weren't available. So then we had a couple come in, and they were doing more rebirthing style. And I was like, need to explore this further. I was having experiences that were very akin to those that I was having in the jungle and so on. And so with ayahuasca, and yeah, so then rebirthing was the first piece, 21-day practitioner training that we held, but also we ran it, but we're also students of. And then super lucky to have the support teacher there know of Edward's work already. And he was saying, the way that you guys go about your work, you would love how this guy Edward goes about his work. So I checked him out, and I was like, let's give this 2-week taster a go in Bali. And after 2 sessions, in the middle of going through a 12-month business separation that was, running the physio clinics for 11 years, there was a lot going on in my life at that point in time, severe, physical injury. And to experience myself as myself again after 2 sessions, even though I felt I was doing a pretty epic job of, staying somewhat within my window of tolerance, but kind of maybe just at the edge of it for a prolonged period of, 2 to 3 years, to then kind of land back in myself and have that spaciousness within myself, and have this body, and the challenges that it was going through, to feel like home again, was super special. So, 2 sessions, and I took this guy, Edward, that I'd only known for 2 days, to dinner and said, listen, whatever we end up doing, I want to contribute 1% of our revenue to the research that you're doing in breath work. And without a single thought, he just responded with, why don't you take the logo and start Breathwork Byron? And I went back to my accommodation that evening and secured the domain breathworkbyron.com.au. And it's been such an epic ride with Stephen, Edward, Sarah, myself, as the team, kind of helping bring this to Australia and supporting humans here as practitioners, but also the people that are really embracing this approach, this particular approach to not just breath work, but healing in and of itself. So, and healing not because you might need, I didn't feel like I needed deep healing, otherwise my life would end, although it can be really useful for that. But healing also for the purpose of thriving as a human being and feeling connected to oneself and everything else, and being able to be of greater service in my business and to a team and to a community and so on. So yeah, both sides of what healing might represent. Yeah, for sure. And I have a lot of clients that'll kind of say, because they're incredibly successful, and they've already, by the measures of success of our Western world and so on, and have built incredible businesses, and they're just feeling like, I just want to feel alive again. Yeah, I just want to connect with myself. I want to feel alive again. And so, yeah, being able to live well, to feel alive, and yeah, I think, and to thrive, and resilience is a part of that. What stops that from being a lived experience is a really powerful question to ask. I feel like I champion the work of FBR, not because it's FBR, but because I so deeply believe in the principles of FBR. So when I came to FBR, I wasn't looking to simply become a breathwork practitioner and just see, oh yeah, what would let me be a breathwork practitioner so I can do this thing called breathwork. The reason, you know, I'm working with FBR in the way that I am is because the principles of FBR and how it is taught and how it is delivered so closely resonate with my life philosophy and how I go about this work anyway. To provide a bit of context around that, it's like sometimes breath work can be mistaken to be about the big experience and the big cathartic experience. And often people are coming in feeling like, let's keep activating because the more that I'm going to activate, the more I'll get out of it. Remember the Nutrigrain ad? You only get out what you put in, right? So it was kind of, I don't know how many people around the world will know Nutrigrain, all of your listeners across the world. It's true, but what you're putting in doesn't always have to be forced. What you put in is what you get out. For me these days, the way that I would say that is, how are you meeting life? Yeah. How are you like coming face to face with life itself and everything that is emerging in life that might feel uncomfortable, that might feel like an intensity. But also we have to remember, and particularly in this space of the healing space, is that like it's not like the focus to not be solely on, oh, it's so intense, or it's only intense with these, if we label good, bad, negative emotions. Also, like meeting life and the medicine of life in the intensity of its capacity for joy. And why might we not be, what is it that's playing out in mind, in body, based on our past that might be limiting our capacity to experience joy to the fullest, whether that comes down to, am I worthy of that joy? Am I, yeah, do I consider myself not to be capable to be able to hold that much happiness, that much joy? And so, whatever it might be. So full spectrum is what I love. I'm going to bring this full circle now about FBR, that it's become epic at activating and also become epic at being able to genuinely restore, relax, and integrate whatever the stimulus was that activated your system and, stressed it in the best of ways. Receive the full gift of that by being able to genuinely relax. And that goes for like the stimulus of a business, the stimulus of life, the stimulus of a difficult conversation with a partner or a team member. All of those are stirring things up and are gifts that are ready to be received by us if we have the means and capacity to be able to then like integrate that, to be able to like let the pieces land, and really receive the nectar that's available there.